Before we get started on the details of this section of a book by A.J. Ayer called Language, Truth, and Logic, which is a very important book written, I think, in the 1930s, really changed a lot of people's view of philosophy, what philosophy is. And this is just a section on morality or moral philosophy. Before we get started in the details, I thought I'd just try to do some things that might explain what he's up to here, what sort of approach he has to morality or moral philosophy. And some of it should definitely be reminiscent of what Wittgenstein said in his lecture on ethics. If I make a statement of any sort, like this, the mailbox is blue, this is the kind of thing that Ayer calls an empirical hypothesis. I've made a claim that a certain thing has a certain characteristic, that mailbox is a certain color. And however obvious that may be in this particular case, it's the kind of thing that he calls a synthetic proposition. Why synthetic? Because two things are being put together which aren't obviously, they don't obviously go together, or they don't necessarily go together. Being a mailbox and being blue. Mailboxes could be any color. They just happen in the United States to be blue. So this mailbox is blue. It's a synthetic proposition. That is, two things which don't necessarily go together, being a mailbox and being blue, are put together. And because of that, it's what he calls an empirical hypothesis, meaning we have to see whether it's true or false, we have to look. We have to actually verify or disverify or to prove or to disprove the truth of the claim. We have to look at the world. And this would, for instance, be something we could contrast to the bachelor is unmarried. We don't have to check. That is, if something is a bachelor, it is also unmarried, because that's part of the meaning of bachelor. We don't have to check. If you say Jim is a bachelor and Jim is unmarried, well, on the truth of the first claim that Jim is a bachelor, we know that he's unmarried, because that's what it means to be a bachelor. So that is not a synthetic proposition. That is an analytic one. Because being unmarried and being a bachelor are necessarily connected in a way that being a mailbox and being blue aren't. So when it comes to synthetic propositions, they are empirical hypotheses. And so the Ayer's idea is that in order for those kind of propositions to be meaningful, at least there must be some way in principle, let's say. So if I say that Joe lives on Pluto, it may be impossible at the present moment to find out whether that's true. I mean, obviously, it's very unlikely to be true. But in principle, we could go to Pluto and see whether Joe lives there. But the idea is that his idea is that, really similar to Wittgenstein's idea, that if you make a proposition about the world, which is a synthetic proposition, not an analytic proposition, that there must be some way, at least in principle, of deciding whether the proposition is true or false. So the mailbox is blue is a perfectly meaningful proposition because it's quite possible in principle to find out whether it's true or false by looking at the mailbox and seeing what color it is. Joe lives on Pluto is a perfectly meaningful claim because it is possible in principle to go to Pluto or to decide whether life can exist on Pluto or whether there's any human habitation of Pluto that would decide the matter. So it's a perfectly meaningful proposition because there are ways, conceivable ways of deciding whether it's true or false. Now this, Joe was wrong when he hit Jim, is just the kind of proposition that he actually calls it a pseudo-proposition. It looks like it looks like a meaningful proposition, but it's not, according to Ayer. And the reason that it's not is because there is no way in principle of deciding whether it's true or false, because it looks like it's making a claim about the world. It looks like it's of the same form as something like the mailbox is blue, but it's not. Mailbox is blue is making a claim about the world, that there is a mailbox and that it is blue. When we say that Joe was wrong when he hit Jim, the Ayer idea is that we're not really saying anything. How would you decide whether that was right or whether that claim was true or false? It's not clear. So what Ayer is saying is that it's neither true nor false. It's meaningless. It's not that Joe wasn't wrong when he hit Jim. It's just that wrongness is not a quality of anything in the world that you can point to and verify, like being blue or being made out of wood or metal, or being 7 feet tall. Those are all things that are real characteristics of things of the world, but wrongness or rightness, no. So one of the things I think that Ayer is trying to get across is that we have to stop thinking that propositions like this are the same as propositions like this. That propositions like Joe was wrong when he hit Jim are just like propositions like the mailbox is blue. They have the same grammatical form, but they are entirely different. So then I suppose that's pretty close to what Wittgenstein was getting at. But then the question becomes, well, if they're not, that is, if a claim or a proposition like Joe was wrong when he hit Jim is not any kind of meaningful proposition, then what is it? And that's kind of where things get interesting, I think, in terms of what we're calling emotivism.